It's real. It's real. You know the deal. You know the deal. Come on.
Hey, it's Shanté.
And I'm Natalie, and welcome to What's the Deal, a podcast powered by the Norfus Firm. At the Norfus Firm, we solve people problems, and we have the great pleasure of working with employers all around the world. Y'all, we're back. We took a break, and we came back today. Hype. Uh,
Awesome. Well,
there's been so much to talk about. It's funny because like when I was like thinking about our first, this is our fourth out of four segments. And when we were on the first one, I'm like, oh, I miss talking to you like this. It was
hmm,
nice. We were all like, oh, hey, 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 hey. Okay, so now we were actually talking about real things, though. And so,
yeah.
um, really, the genesis of this four-part series is the plethora of headlines that we saw, particularly Q3, Q4 of 2024 on the idea that companies are rolling back their DEI initiatives. One of the things we didn't get too much into is sort of some of the why, meaning like what are the pressures. But last year there was some significant lawsuits and legal decisions that sort of called into question the way in which people were doing DEI. And so some of those things did present legal issues, but largely, when we're talking about DEI work, it's not about discriminating in favor of or against people. And that's really where employers can get in trouble, is if they're sort of showing any sort of favoritism toward a certain group to satisfy their DEI programs. Um, and so we're not talking about that. That's not what we propose. That's not what we advise our clients to do. And so when we're thinking about the journey of us getting to this fourth episode, it's first, what's the issue, right? What's out here? Why is DEI so threatening? Why are people so caught off guard by it? Short story, they feel they don't see themselves in the work and they're not really clear about what the work is. So we've talked a little bit about that. Then we went into the business case. Like why is DEI good for your business? And there's hardcore concrete data to show why. And short story there, you make more money. Um, and then in the last segment, we were getting into the people aspect of when you send all these different messages about what you're doing or not doing with DEI, how does that impact your employee base? And at the end of the day, most U.S. employers still need human beings to do jobs. And if you can't get them engaged, if they're not engaged because you don't have a workplace or workplace culture that invites them, and that's fair and that's thoughtful, you're not going to get their best work. And again, you're not going to make the most money you have.
hmm
Now, it wouldn't be us if we didn't have solutions. What do you do about this, right? We're definitely not into just talking about problems. So, what you got, Miss Gordon?
Yeah, no, this part I really enjoy because we like to make things really practical. So we start out in this very kind of esoteric, philosophical, academic conversation, and then we're like, okay, but we actually got to do business and we got to get some things
Exactly.
done. So like, let's bring it forward. And so this particular segment, we're really going to focus on the leader's responsibility here because it's what's the deal. So there's a leadership component to this always. Um, and so, for this particular segment, we really want to introduce a framework that we worked on. And shout out to Danny on our team for really helping us pull this together. And this framework will just allow you to kind of get past the noise. Right? The intention here is to help you hone in and really get clear on what on my role and how I can impact this organization in a more inclusive way. Although, again, people are getting caught up in the terms and the semantics and what things are called, but leading in an inclusive way is still what leaders need to do in order to really retain talent to get the most out of people. Like you have to do it. So trying to avoid it, don't even try to avoid it. Don't even get caught up, I think is what we're saying with that all the
Yeah.
time is do your job and do it well. And part of your job is leading well, is being inclusive. So just to introduce the framework, it's called the LEAD framework. So LEAD, and it obviously four parts, right? So the first one is the listening, which to me always brings up this curiosity aspect of it, and leaning into, all right, so what's going on here? What are the different sentiments, the different opinions, perspectives that we're hearing, and how do we like understand what's happening? And so for the listen aspect of it, you can do that in a number of ways. And if you see me looking, I'm looking at my notes here. there's sentiment tracking. So you have your engagement surveys and the like what are employees saying about your organization, about your leaders, your managers, etc. What are your customers saying? So what's happening actually in the marketplace around this? And so we hear a lot, obviously this is happening now because you see like one organization says they're going to double down on DEI. I think it was, who was it? Target, Costco, like a
Costco.
couple of them. Costco
Costco.
was like, no, we're 10 toes down in it. And people are like, oh, I guess I need to. I'm a person. I live by myself, but apparently I need 50 pounds of meat in my freezer
Exactly.
now because
You know, the
you
reaction to Costco, that's interesting you say that, because I remember when I first went through my social media timeline after Costco was like, get out of here, we're doing DEI. It was like people were like, I need a membership. I'm going to be a member for life. And it's
know.
like, and the reason why that in particular is important is if you go back to, I think it was our last segment, you want to spend money where you feel seen, heard, and cared for. We have our a wine place we love because they treat us so well every single time we go, and
Mhm.
so we want to spend our money there. So you want people out in the ether saying, I am going to keep buying. I'm going to keep buying and buying and buying, right? And
Mhm.
so,
Mhm.
like, that's why, like, the listening piece is so important. And I just want to point out here why I think the L in lead, and I'm glad it worked out this way, is the most important, is oftentimes what we see is people who have led in a way, one way for a long time, and they're very resistant to
Ugh.
hearing that things are not working the way they think they should based on how they lead, right? So it's like they're using an approach that's not getting the results they want. They
Mhm.
don't often see that it's because of their approach. We come in and say, oh, it's because of your approach. And then it's like, no, but I've been doing it this way forever. And it's like, okay, but you're not getting the results you want. So the listen
It's like,
part is important to understand
yeah.
what's shifting and changing. What did, what did your employees on your team say a year ago? And has that changed to now? What were your customers saying a year ago?
Right.
And does that change to now? Because you can't just be blind to the fact that stuff changes around you. And I think that's what these leaders get in these rooms with these spreadsheets and these numbers. And it's like you're missing the facts
Mhm. Mhm.
and
And you got to
listening
be able to
helps.
look at all of it, right? It's not even just and nothing in a vacuum. So
Right.
and nothing necessarily. I mean, you have to weight things accordingly, like based on what your priorities are. But you got to take it all in. So what are all the inputs and where are they coming from? So of course you have your employees, and of course you have your customers and the market in general. But other stakeholders. I mean, you have shareholders. You have other people that impact your decision making. So you really got to take your time in listening. Like, don't rush through the listening. I think we something we see often is people want to just they want to jump to a solution too quickly. Take your time and listen and really get a sense of what's happening, like for real, like
Yeah.
not just what you make up in your head. All right, so that's
And,
the
and,
L.
and can I just say one
Hmm.
thing really quick there. The lack of listening creates a lot of waste.
Mm, facts.
And
Yeah.
not being intentional. So when you're not taking the time to listen to learn as opposed to listen to sort of respond or react, then you're getting, I can't tell you how many times we started this project 3 different times. We said we were doing this 5 years ago, and we started it and we did all this work then, and then it wasn't clear, and then now we're supposed to be doing it again. I mean, we hear this all the time, and that's wasteful. You're wasting
And why
money.
does that happen? A lot of times that happens because they short circuited that listening process. They were like, "Oh, we
Correct.
don't have money for this, or we don't want to invest in that, or we don't want to do a survey because of this, or we don't want to." Okay, you're making decisions based on either bad or limited information. So it's up
When
to you.
I am when I and this is, we're in the middle of this right now, but when I am in a situation where I'm investigating the same company more than once, I'm like, y'all are not listening.
Now listen.
That's the first thing. You're not listening. You're being told why this is happening, and you're not listening. So we know for sure it costs money because that means people are paying us more than one time to look at something that we told them how to fix the first time, and they didn't fix it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which I mean, so the listen is the first part gets to the evaluate, right? So then, which is the E in lead, and you're looking at
Thanks. Thanks.
just to be clear, in case people forgot where we were in the program.
Yeah, but we did get a little off track. You're right. You're right. Well, on track, but
So
longer track.
right, exactly. So, so this is the evaluate side. So what did you hear? What did you hear? Like you went through your listening process, whatever it was, and then okay, now you got some data, some information. All right, so let's look at it. You got to go through. You got to determine effectiveness. You got to look at your metrics. You got to do your cost benefit analysis, any sort of risk assessment. You got to look at okay, so let's start to analyze this data now and see what's going on, and start to map out kind of where we think we can go based on what we've heard. And again, take your time with that too. Like don't just like don't rush through this process. Like really sit and use your tools or the other people that you can talk to. We did this when we were working on a methodology for representation, and it's like, all right, do we have all the people here that can help us really make sure this is the right approach? Let's
Right.
make sure that we're pulling in the right stakeholders here. So that's the evaluate portion of this. The
So
A
if we
in
just
lead.
pause there before we get to
Okay,
A, because you said it twice now with both listen and evaluate
slow
on
down,
not rushing.
slow down.
And I just made this comment to a client in a check-in a couple weeks ago of everybody wants something fast, right? But fast is not defined. So if you're looking at, an engagement we just recently completed that was over 2 years, we know how long stuff takes, right? So we knew that sort of the big place that they were going to try to get to would take probably about 2 years. So that's the overarching goal they were trying to get to. I think we need to make sure that we're not overlooking the many wins you have along the way, which I think is what happens. People say they want this big change, so they want greater retention rates among women in director level positions, and that's their only version of success. We know that you're not going to see a huge increase in the retention of women in director roles tomorrow if
Right.
nothing's changed. That is an over time sort of progress. But the fact that you are making these efforts to listen, you're making these efforts to evaluate, if properly communicated to employees, is still progress, right? You're still moving stuff along. And maybe you have some quick wins and other ways in which you can, show other types of success. But I think the reason why Shantae is saying don't rush is because we didn't get to these places overnight. So we're not going to have a solution overnight. And the pressure to be fast actually makes it slower because then it's a lot of convincing and cajoling and trying to go back and re-explain and reestablish and recenter. And it's just like, let it take the time it takes, right?
Hmm.
So that you are getting to the best results and that it's easier to iterate. It's easier to change if you need to as circumstances change.
Absolutely, absolutely. Good point. The A is align. So making sure that things make sense within your context, right? Like, don't just be doing stuff just to do stuff. Like, align it. Make sure it makes sense with your values, company values, business strategy that's been vetted. People buy into it. Communicate to the point that you were making. Like, tell people what you're doing. Make sure it aligns with the message that we've been saying over and over again. Why are we doing this? Like, this is why. This is how this connects with this. So that's that. I mean, the change management really comes in these last, well, in all of it actually, but really in these last 2 points. But you just want to make sure everyone's on board. And so, in order to get alignment, you have to do the work to make sure it aligns, right? I know we
Which
shouldn't
is
use it in the definition, but you know what I
No, but this is exactly this the A is why I say DEI should be viewed more as a change management function that looks
mean.
across the organization because the alignment is like, okay, if we're saying we have a drive to 2030 and by 2030 we want to be the number one widget maker in the world, right? Okay, so if you're listened and you evaluated what you heard and are sort of trying to figure out next steps, that drive to 2030 should be the top of mind, right? So
Hmm.
how would all these other actions we're taking align to? If you
Hmm.
don't have like a change management team or someone who's able to look across, you end up with all these vacuumed strategies, which we see all the time, where you're like, and Shantae is hilarious because she always is like, well, what does this have to do with? I'll be like, girl, I do not know. I do not know.
I don't know. No one
These
knows.
people didn't talk to each other. So then you have all these wacky, and that's where the confusion is created. And frankly, a little bit more intentionality is not that difficult to make it make sense for people. You should always be reminding people about your, if you have a year you're trying to get to, that should be in every communication. And then how this connects to that. Why am I asking you to be an inclusive leader? Because to get to 2030, we need to keep this amount of retention. We need to see this amount of growth, right? Like all those things are part of how you get to a place.
Right, exactly. And people and you need the buy-in there. So people need, again, make it make sense. It has to make sense for people, or else they're going to be like, oh, this, they're going to throw it away. They're going to discard it, and then you get in a situation where people don't understand what this is and where it fits, and here we are. Anyway, so that's the LEA. So the D is
I got to
the
give you a
deliver.
little shimmy on the whole.
No shoulders, Jimmy. The last part of this is deliver. So to the point, like it's go time now. So we're marching towards a certain, in a certain direction. We have a vision, we have a goal in mind, and so how do we know that we're getting there? So you're setting clear success metrics. Like, are we moving in the right direction? Do we all know what that looks like? Right? It's making sure that we're clear there. Um, in what time frame? Now, some things can be flexible and fluid, but you still want to give people a sense of like, okay, we want to drive. You still need to drive
We have
forward. You need to drive
milestones,
business.
right? There's
Exactly.
milestones. Like you may not be at the
Exactly.
destination, but I mean, again, this always gets at what we talk about a lot. What you don't, whatever the cliche is, but like whatever you don't measure doesn't happen type of thing.
Hmm.
And so this deliver piece, when I'm listening to, is like the accountability for
Yes.
movement and progress.
Yes. 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 And it's not what we find a lot is that people get really fixed on it. Right. So it's like we want to make progress in a certain area, but you need to give yourself enough space to be able to pivot and do things that you need to do as long as you're moving in that right direction. But it comes in the action planning and the communication and the monitoring to know that you're moving in that right direction so that you can make whatever changes you need to make. But everyone is aligned to like, we're going forward, we're going this way. So again, this framework, and we'll probably have some downloads and other stuff that you can check out. But it really is helping to quiet the noise and just get leaders really focused on how do I get all my people to move in the direction that we need them to move in.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Okay, so we have to listen, evaluate, align, deliver.
Hmm.
I think we had an episode, not I think, I know, but we had an episode last year, 2024, where we talked a little bit about our own evaluation process or how you do this. So we'll reference you back to that because we went into sort of great detail about each step. But why don't we just spend just a few minutes on like how you would apply what we're talking about, right? So if we're saying to listen, evaluate, align, and deliver, um, how does that like what would be the things that what does that mean practically?
Sure. I mean, so first, if you get a sense that something is going on within your
Hmm.
organization, right? Like something's bubbling up, and you're hearing, and it's very anecdotal, but you're hearing it enough that you're like, I should probably pay attention to this because
Hmm.
something is brewing over here. So you want to understand what's happening. So that's where the listening comes in. So what is the formal process for which you're going to gather information? So how are you going to get sentiment from employees? How are you going to understand what's happening in your market? Again, depending on what the issue is, how are you gathering your information? Where are the places where you're going to listen? Sometimes it's one-on-one, right? Like we do one-on-one interviews. Sometimes it's more focus groups and listening sessions where it's a group of people to size depending on, we don't like to have them too big, but a good enough size to get a broad enough perspective on things. Surveys, market research, right? Focus groups out in the marketplace. So it just depends. So you want to go out and make sure that you are gathering the information. And of course, but even
Well,
before then, yeah,
yeah,
you
I was
want
going
to
to say,
you
but
want to get
let's
it.
stop for 1 second because if I'm a leader and I'm overseeing a
Hmm.
team, I'm going to be like, what do you mean? How can I survey my people and all of that? So
Yeah.
let's just be real clear here, role and responsibility. Make sure you're asking for this data, right? So
Right.
if your company doesn't do surveys, then maybe you would do your own survey. Or maybe you would start with asking for your attrition metrics, like and the demographics of your team, right? Starting from, do you even know the makeup of your team? I think is like, if I'm looking at it as I'm a leader, how can I fix this myself if I'm not getting tons of direction? what does your team look like? Are they staying? Are they going? Are they getting promoted? Are they getting raises? Like, I think a lot of leaders are not even cognizant of those basics, right? And so then
Right.
also to your point, if I'm sensing a problem, if your company doesn't do surveys, talk to them about that. But if they do, ask for the metrics and partner with your HR people function folks on what it means. Like, get that converse, build that partnership. You should be an expert in who your team is.
And
Their perfor-
speaking of partnership, like you really take the time to figure out who do I need to be talking to,
yes.
both who I'm need to be listening to, but also who are my partners in this? Who can I
Yeah.
across the organization to make sure that we're taking the right approach here?
Right.
Because you say it all the time, if you're going to open up this Pandora's box, like if you're going to ask for this information, make sure you're in a position to be able to do something with it, right?
Correct.
So,
Correct. So if I one thing if I could just leave our listeners with one thing today, know your team, right?
hmm
Like know the on paper part of your team, right? Again, demographics, performance review ratings, promotion rates, raises rates, turnover rates. Know that because if you again, it's like it's part of knowing yourself because it's your team that's helping you move things along. And if you're not regularly checking in, if you don't have at least a monthly practice of
mm
reviewing this information and being thoughtful of it, you're gonna get caught with your pants down over and over and be like, oh my God, I thought Shantae was so happy. I thought she was doing so well. Oh, she had so much potential. But if you're not being thoughtful about whether Shantae is getting that feedback, when the last time she's been promoted, when the last time she's gotten a raise, like that's a guess. So we're
hmm
saying don't guess. And the first step
hmm
would be just making sure you have that basic data about your team.
hmm
Other steps would be getting survey data, doing stay interviews or one-on-one interviews,
hmm
as you've talked about, to get beneath it, right? The quality of that data. What does that mean, right? What do these things mean? I think that's a huge first step for anyone here.
hmm
Like just that alone is going to create awareness that you don't even realize that it creates.
Exactly. You don't know what you don't know until you dig in.
Exactly.
And then when you get in there, then that's when you evaluate it, right? Like you look at it, what's being said here, what am I hearing, what's happening, and then what does that mean to the larger organization? Like what is it, right? Like how does that, which is kind of the evaluate and align. You're kind of doing those, I think, in a similar kind of succinct way where you're looking at, all right, this is what I'm hearing. Does this match our values? Our people are experiencing this, but we don't want people to experience this because we tout these kinds of values. So it's like, how do we? There's a misalignment here, and let's figure out what's happening and what makes sense in terms of how do we figure out what we want to do to move forward. So there's a deeper analysis that happens there, but there's a lot of like back and forth between the evaluating and the aligning. Like there's a lot of work that happens there in order to make sure that you're coming up with the right solutions or strategies to move the work forward, which gets into the deliver, and then that's about setting up more of your action planning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, I think the thing that we like to remind folks of is that this is not about trying to make everybody happy, right? Like that's not what we're talking about here because the reality is you can't make everybody happy. There is no employment practice that you can develop where every single person's going to think it's a great idea and be happy about it. This is really, again, about fairness and how you not only set yourself up to be fair, but to appear to be fair, because that's just as important as actually being fair, right? And so, one of the main ways that we know people feel like things are not unfair is when they don't feel like their bosses are listening to them. And
hmm
so that's why that's why I've harped so much on the listen piece because and the not like knowing your team piece because you can get so far just by knowing something important that's important to them about them type of thing. It's being strategic really with how you manage and how you spend your time with your folks.
hmm you get better data.
Yeah.
Because if you're actually taking the time to get to know and listen and you're doing the work that you're saying where you're in the practice of constantly monitoring, constantly checking in, making sure performance reviews are happening, people trust that and they're more willing to give you the real and the raw feedback that you need to
Because
make better decisions.
you end up with a bunch of lies if you don't, right? We hear this all the time. It's where it's like a senior leader is like, oh yeah, but like we actually had this happen recently where it was like we heard from like hundreds of people that they took a survey on something and they felt like they weren't listened to. And when we are giving this readout to like senior leaders, we didn't do a survey. We did a survey. We didn't do a survey. And I'm like, why are y'all getting caught up about whether you did or didn't do a survey, first of all? Because the people said they took a survey. You think hundreds of people are going to say they took a survey if they didn't take some kind of survey, right? They all said survey, right? So that's what they thought they took. Why does that matter? Because what we're telling you is that all of them are saying they felt like they weren't listened to. And it's like, then that becomes the narrative. These people said they took a survey, but nobody took a survey. Like they're going to go and say their own truth instead of the actual truth. And then because they're not actually listening, then these weird narratives swirl around the top about what these leaders think are happening. And I think not enough leaders push back and say, what does our data tell us? Not the one anecdote from the one person who had happened to tell you, or the one person that you saved from quitting, what their particular situation was. What does the data say? What are employees telling us about what's going on here? Not fighting with the data, which we do see that too. If it because it doesn't match with the narrative they've created in their head because they have never been basing it off of real data. They've been basing it on a few anecdotes. So, I think that also goes back to like, you're not going to lead well if you are avoiding discomfort at all costs. It's not the way it works. To grow, we feel pain, right? It's not permanent. It's building new skills. It's taking feedback, right? That used to be like the biggest, like, the performance indicator. Oh, okay, is she good at taking constructive feedback? I think most leaders are not because they have a story in their head about what it is, and then you get stuck, and then you get in these situations, and then it's like so just like stop resisting, stop, listen, breathe, take your time. It's not about you personally. It's just the way things go, right? Like, I think that we can't sort of understate that piece because to get to a point of being able to deliver, you need all the facts, right? So it's like that is sort of, I mean, it seems obvious. Most things do, but they aren't of that. So okay, you've gathered data, you've listened. As a leader or a manager, then what?
I mean, you got to put it together. You got to figure it out. You got to understand like what is it saying? What am I supposed to do with it? And does it make sense for my organization? Right? Like, you got to go through that process, and that involves partnering with people. That involves engaging other stakeholders. That involves getting other folks to look at it and just making sure, am I looking at this the right way? Is there anything that's missing here in order to really get to the right place? It, 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 you can't. We've seen this too, where people just decide, okay, I got this little bit of whatever, and I'm going to go off and run off and do this thing over here, off by themselves. It's like, but no. And you always reference like the Will Ferrell, what is it? When he goes streaking. Old school when he's streaking by himself. It's like you don't want to be streaking by yourself, guys.
And this is your brain was going where my brain was going, which is okay. So like when you're getting to the point of when you're getting to really all of this, as I'm thinking out loud, all of the steps in lead require some kind of partnership and collaboration. This is not a leader, go do this by yourself. And so you have to communicate it's like a two-way communication. Yes, you want to listen, but you also have to tell people that you're acting on what they listened, because that's also how you solidify the listening, is that I appreciate you sharing that with me, Shanté. Unfortunately, that's not something we can do this year. But what I was thinking we can do and get people's feedback and buy-in, so that alignment needs to also be bring your team along with you. This idea that you can go carry these things on your back and go figure it out yourself is very paternalistic and maternalistic, right? Because then you are starting to guess at what will work. And there's no reason to guess if you have other people you can go talk to about, all right, I'm thinking this aligns to our drive to 2030 in this way. What do you all think? And this is not to say that every decision you make, you need to get feedback on, because then we would never get things done. But when it comes to these culture, like a workplace culture, you're trying to develop a culture that people are bought into, they have to be included in that process.
Agreed. Agreed. Yep. So yeah.
All right, so here we are. Let's just kind of like run through just a few key takeaways. So the LEAD framework is a blueprint for leadership action. Lead, we listen, evaluate, align, deliver. Okay. 4 steps. Data-driven decision making is key. Data-driven decision making is key.
Not
It is
stories
why,
that we make up in our head. Actual
not
data.
stories, because those you can go watch Netflix for.
Yeah, exactly. No.
What are the facts? It is stunning how often people get away from the facts and just again short riffed it with what they heard from a couple of people that they happen to trust, right? So what does the data tell you? What are your teams telling you? What are their stories, their journeys telling you that's happening so that you can move this work forward differently? And strategic communication is non-negotiable.
Hmm.
You will fall flat on your face if you are not strategically communicating what's happening. Tell me.
No, I was gonna like break down strategic communication just real quick in like 30 seconds. What is strategic communication?
Being thoughtful of how you can show the sausage getting made without having to tell them every single thing that's happening so that they understand that progress is being made. That's what people want to know. That's why you have more restaurants with kitchen theater and you can sit. We just had dinner the other night where they were like, here, go to the bar and watch the chefs cook. People want to know what's going on. Tell them.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Brilliant.
Well, this was fun. Real
Yeah.
fun. When we are back next, when our next monthly series, we're going to be talking about how you strengthen your DEI practices when you hear all this rollback, which we know is kind of a little bit of a misnomer, but
Mm-hmm.
still, you could always be better. So thanks for listening. We would love to hear from you all. Please reach out. Let us know what you want to hear about. Let us know some of the challenges you're experiencing in the workplace. I would say I would normally try to list all the ways that you can reach us, but I think the easiest way is go to thenorfisfirm.com
That's it.
because every way to find us is there. And we'll talk soon.
Take care.
Diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership. That's the deal when you know what you're dealing with. Learn how to